here in
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is America on Fire by Dr. Elizabeth Hinton. The subtitle, The Untold Story of Police Violence and Black Rebellion Since the 1960s. I'm reading from the introduction. On a cold Monday at the start of February, Joseph McNeil, Franklin McCain, Ezell Blair Jr., and David Richmond sat down at a whites-only lunch counter at Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. A waiter refused to serve the young men and suggested they order takeout instead. The four North Carolina A&T students remained at the counter. The store manager approached and asked them to leave. Still, they did not move. A police officer arrived, slapping his nightstick in his hand in an attempt to intimidate. Rather than allow the students' offense against Jim Crow to continue, the manager of the store closed the store for the day. 24 black students returned on Tuesday. Over 50 black students and 3 white students participated in the sit-in on the next day, Wednesday, February 3rd, 1960. News of the protests spread, and soon the sit-in movement had expanded to 55 cities and 13 states. By April, over 50,000 students were involved. Conceived and organized entirely by young people, the sit-in movement ultimately led to the founding of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which was run by activists such as John Lewis and Stokely Carmichael. As a Fisk student, Lewis participated in the sit-ins in Nashville, Tennessee, and he would go on to steer the Freedom Riders in the summer of 1961 and speak at the March on Washington in 1963. Carmichael joined the sit-in movement as a high school student and would famously call for Black Power at the SNCC rally in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1966. Together, Lewis, Carmichael, and tens of thousands of other young black Americans signaled that their generation was prepared to risk their lives for freedom and equality. From Greensboro onward, the sit-ins helped build momentum and support for racial justice. The students in Greensboro engaged in a nonviolent protest to demand full integration, the right to vote, equal educational opportunities, decent jobs, protection against white supremacist terrorism, and an end to police violence. These were the central aims of the civil rights movement more broadly. By the end of the decade, black students at North Carolina A&T State University were still protesting, but now they were destroying property, assaulting police officers, and shooting in the direction of law enforcement, if not coming close to killing cops in self-defense. In May 1969, after black students at Greensboro's James B. Dudley High School were arrested, brutalized, and tear gassed by police during a series of protests against arbitrary disciplinary measures, A&T students came to the teenagers' defense. The confrontations between local police and black high school and college students led authorities to call the National Guard to A&T's campus, unleashing violence and repression that ended in the killing of sophomore Willie Grimes. A pivotal stop on the road to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, by the end of the decade, Greensboro was a site of sustained violence. It was far from unique in this regard. Between 1964 and 1972, but especially between 68 and 72, the United States endured internal violence on a scale not seen since the Civil War. Every major urban center in the country burned during those 8 years. Violence flared up not only in archetypal ghettos, including Harlem and Watts, and in majority black cities such as Detroit and Washington, D.C. It appeared in Greensboro, North Carolina, in Gary, Indiana, in Seattle, Washington, and countless places in between. Every city, small or large, where black residents lived in segregated, unequal conditions. In the North and the South, the East and the West, the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, black people threw rocks and bottles at police, shot at them with rifles, smashed the windows of businesses and institutions, hurled firebombs, and plundered local stores. These events, what we commonly call riots, or what people who are to the left of center sometimes refer to as civil disturbances, caused hundreds of millions of dollars of property damage. Most immediately, they shaped the lives of the store owners whose businesses were destroyed, of the parents who lost their teenage sons to the police, and of the firefighters and cops who were harmed or killed. But ever since, Americans have been living in a nation and a national culture created in part by the extreme violence of the 1960s and the early 1970s. The aftershocks of that era have, at times, taken the form of mass violence to which all Americans have been witness. In Miami in 1980, in Los Angeles in 1992, in Cincinnati in 2001, and in more recent years, in Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Maryland, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. The enduring impact of the violence of the 60s and 70s has been felt more regularly and more acutely by black people in American cities who faced new policing practices that emerged under the banner of the war on crime. The routine stop and frisks that attacked people's dignity, the breaking up of community gatherings, the presence of armed, uniformed officers in the hallways of under-resourced public schools, and more. Such strategies help repress mass violence as a regular phenomenon, but they ironically made further riots inevitable. Those strategies remain in place today. The book, America on Fire.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday. Thom Hartmann here with you. We had a great 4th of July weekend. I hope you did too. Got together with family and friends. We got a big show today. In our third hour, Martin Sheen is going to drop by. He's got a new movie. It's the Gary Davis story. This is fascinating. What does it mean to be a citizen of the world? We'll get into that with Martin Sheen in the third hour. In our second hour, can America just now admit that the Second Amendment is a failed experiment? I'm going to dig into that. And also, the Weather Channel has some interesting news about climate change, as does Fox. We'll dig into those things in our second hour. And here in this first hour, I want to get to, in just a moment, to don't put your mask away, and here's why. But I will do that after the break. But first, you know, my op-ed over at HartmannReport.com this morning, and really the thing that's on the top of my mind. I mean, I really think this is the biggest issue America is facing right now. The single biggest issue is, why can't America have nice things? I mean, basically what we have now is a system where right-wing billionaires have bought our political system. They've stacked the Supreme Court through, you know, groups like the Federalist Society and the Judicial Crisis Network that are funded by billionaire money, dark money that you can't even track a lot of it. They get these people on the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Courts say, oh, yeah, it's cool for billionaires to influence elections. And the result of that is that our democracy doesn't work. And, you know, one of the things that they're doing is, you know, making it harder for people to vote. And because our democracy doesn't work, we don't have nice things. That's it in summary. I mean, what got me thinking about this was a post that I saw in Democratic Underground over the weekend. Somebody had turned a post by a woman named Caroline who lives in Sweden. I linked to her Twitter account. It's SWE Resistance on Twitter over at HartmannReport.com. And she wrote, and this was, you know, actually a couple of years ago, but now it's been turned into a meme and gone viral all over again. She wrote, I live in Sweden. We have Social Security, affordable health care, strict gun laws, 5 weeks paid annual leave, a year maternity leave, etc. And no, we're not a communist country. We're not even strictly socialistic, but socio-democratic. And our freedom is not inhibited. For example, health care can cost a maximum of $130 a year for visits to healthcare centrals, in other words, doctor's offices. Hospital nights cost $12 a night with a $175 ceiling per month. And prescription drugs have a yearly ceiling of $250. So how did Sweden get that? Well, the Swedish people kept electing politicians who said, that's what I'm going to give you. We're going to do democratic socialism or social democracy here in Sweden. Now, you know, the word socialism, I get it. In 1848, Karl Marx used that word to describe what today we refer to as communism. And basically, you know, today, nowadays, particularly among the millennial generation, the word socialism doesn't mean what Karl Marx said it meant. It doesn't mean what we call communism. Basically, the only people who call socialism or communism socialism anymore are right-wing cranks and actual hardcore Marxists who want to, you know, hang on to the word. But most of the world refers to Sweden as basically a socialist country. And or a country practicing socialism, or as I said, democratic socialism. It's not just Sweden. Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Finland, they all have remarkably similar systems. And the rest of the European Union is only just a step and a half behind them. Nobody in any of these countries in the European Union will ever go bankrupt because somebody in their family got sick. Yet over 1.5 million Americans go bankrupt, families go bankrupt every year because somebody in their family got sick. Lose their home, lose everything. Nobody in any of these European countries who wants to get a good college education or go to a trade school who's capable of doing it is prohibited from doing it or will go into debt for doing it. In fact, some of these countries even give you a stipend, a subsidy to go to college. They voted for this, the Swedes and the Norwegians and the Danes and the Germans and the French and the Spanish. They voted for this because their political systems allow everyone to vote. That's how democracy got translated into social democracy. In the Nordic Council of Ministers, for example, on their website says, quote, this is about Sweden, everyone who is entitled to vote and who is registered in the population register in Sweden, which is, by the way, something that happens when you're born. Back to what it says. Everyone who's entitled to vote and is registered in the population register in Sweden is automatically included in the electoral roll, the Röstlängden, and receives a voter card by post. This is true of basically every country in Europe. You're born, you're a citizen, they know that. When you turn 18, you're automatically registered to vote. You don't have to do anything. And voting is easy. You can vote by mail, you can show up in person, whatever you want, it's easy. So here in the United States, it turns out most Americans would like the stuff that the Swedes have. I mean, let's just go through the list. All Americans told CBS pollsters recently by a 66 to 30% ratio. 66% of all Americans told CBS pollsters, quote, government health, we would support a government health insurance for all program. A recent Harris poll asked, do you support a proposal that would make public colleges, universities, and trade schools free for all and cancel all student debt? 58% of Americans said yes. Only 42% said no. These countries, these European countries, have high unionization rates, sometimes approaching 90%. They have higher minimum wages, and they have higher taxes on rich people. Well, we'd like those things here as well. I mean, the Gallup asked Americans if they'd like to join a union. 6 out of 10 Americans said yes. A Reuters Ipsos poll last year found that 64% of Americans agree with this statement, quote, the very rich should contribute an extra share of their total wealth each year to support public programs, end quote. So if a majority of Americans want these things that Scandinavians and Europeans have, free health care, free schools, unions, good wages, taxes on the rich, why don't we have these things? Why do we instead have the highest child mortality rate in the developed world, the highest maternal mortality rate in the developed world, the lowest tax rates on the rich in the developed world, a $1.5 trillion student debt that's collapsed an entire generation's hopes and dreams, and billionaire Jeff Bezos shooting himself into outer space rather than letting a union into his company or paying his damn taxes? Why is that? And the answer is pretty straightforward. Conservative billionaires in the U.S. Supreme Court. Lewis Powell in 1971 wrote his famous memo telling billionaires how to take over the country. A year later, Richard Nixon put him on the Supreme Court in 72. 4 years later in 76 in the Buckley versus Valeo decision, the Supreme Court said if a billionaire wants to pour money down the throat of a politician so much that they basically own that politician, that's not bribery, that's not corruption, which is what we'd called it from 1776 to 1976. That's not bribery and corruption, even though we called it that for 200 years. We're going to call that free speech protected by the First Amendment. And then 2 years later in the Bellotti case in 1978, the Supreme Court said, oh, and by the way, we're going to apply this to corporations too. And then, of course, in 2010, they doubled down with Citizens United. But to make it even worse, to make it even more difficult or complex or whatever the word, we've created this Byzantine voting system that is just, I mean, absolutely over the top. Actually, I'm going to play this clip of Jimmy Carter talking about this too, Sean. I have a feeling my volume is going to be way too high. Let me turn it down a little. And let's see here. This is me talking to Jimmy Carter just a couple of years ago.
Politics. It seems a violation of principles of democracy. In the minute or so we have left, your thoughts on that?
This is about Citizens United.
It violates the essence of what made America a great country in its political system. Now it's just an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery being the essence of getting the nominations for president or the elected president. And the same thing applies to governors and U.S. senators and Congress members. So now we've just seen a complete subversion of our political system as a payoff to major contributors who want and expect and sometimes get favors for themselves after the election's over.
So there you go. President Jimmy Carter, right, who has lived through it all, who remembers before the Supreme Court legalized political bribery and then has seen the consequences of political bribery. So how do we keep this stuff in law? How is it that the government, doesn't change? Why is it that our legislators? Well, because we keep electing these, corporate shills. The entire Republican Party, a few in the Democratic Party, who are saying, "Oh, we need to keep the filibuster so Republicans can block stuff." And with that, and the reason why we keep electing them is because it's so hard to vote in the United States. We are literally the only developed country in the world where you've got to jump through hoops to register to vote. We are the only developed country in the world where partisan politicians can purge the voting roll and regularly do in order to reduce the populations of people voting who are inclined to vote the opposition party. In other words, we're the only country in the world where, for example, Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger down in Georgia, or Greg Abbott and his Secretary of State down in Dan, what's his name, down in Texas, just purge black and brown people off the voting rolls just because they can. We're the only country in the world where the Supreme Court says you can do that. And as a result, we don't have the politicians that reflect the desires of the majority of Americans, and we don't have policies that give what the majority of Americans want. Now, there is a piece of legislation, the For the People Act, that actually radically diminishes the power of dark money in politics. And that's the reason why, Freedom Works and all these other right-wing groups that are funded by right-wing billionaires are fighting it tooth and nail. And the so-called Problem Solvers Caucus, and these guys, they're all like, oh no, we can't have that. We shouldn't, we need to keep the filibuster, etc. We got a big lift to do here. And when these politicians come back from the 4th of July holiday next week, it is my hope that there will be some forward motion on getting rid of the filibuster, because that's the thing that is preventing this from becoming law. Anyhow, we'll continue in just a moment. I've got to tell you about don't put your mask away. What's going on with that?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Tyrone in Harlem, New York. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
How you doing, Tom?
Good.
I'll tell you, the noise is coming in my phone. I tell you why we can't have nice things, because there are certain segment in America that will always work against another group of people having what they feel you shouldn't have, because welfare was put together, to help out the white farmers. Social Security, they were even cut out a certain segment of the American population because they felt that a certain amount of people should be entitled to it. They wanted real Americans.
Yeah, it didn't cover domestic workers, for example, because they were principally people of color.
Yeah, so you still have a certain segment of this country, people in this country that will never accept a certain segment of the American population as humans that should be entitled to what everybody else gets. And because we continue to battle this whole division between all of us, that's why we end up, like you said, putting people in office that fill out our idea of what Americans should be entitled to, and what some shouldn't be entitled to. So it's a rough, we're a work in progress, which we're always going to be, but I don't know how we're going to get past this division, mainly because we're so poorly educated here.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree, Tyrone. And in the book that I've got coming out next month, The Hidden History of American Healthcare, I lay out how literally for over 100 years, you had presidents from Republican Teddy Roosevelt through Franklin Roosevelt, Democrat, through Harry Truman, through Lyndon Johnson, John Kennedy, Barack Obama. You had multiple presidents trying to put into Bill Clinton, trying to put into place a national health care system in the United States. And every single time, the people who shot it down were shooting it down. When you drill down into their logic and into what they were actually saying, and this is all a matter of public record, what they were really saying was, we don't want to have a national health care system because black people will get it. That's what it came down to. And I mean, it was just, it was that naked. And, and I make this point. This is, these billionaires are funding candidates and funding memes. They had one of their guys on Morning Joe this morning talking about the evil Marxist critical race theory. They're trying to scare white people. They're using race to scare white people to get them to vote for fascists, basically.
Wow. And am I overthinking the fact that we would not have even had a constitution had they been forced to accept black people as human beings?
Yeah. Well, we certainly we wouldn't have had the economic and political system. Yeah. Go ahead.
To take them as people say life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. I think it's more important to be pursuing equality, because if you can't treat another person as equal, then what's the point of even being happy if you can't be treated as someone that is equal to another human being?
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very well said. Tyrone, thank you. It's always nice to hear from you. I appreciate the call. It's 22 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. I got to talk about COVID right after this break, and then we'll pick up your phone calls after the break at the bottom of the hour. Stick around. We'll be right back. It's the place where sane people meet. We'll be right back.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. 9 years before the oligarchs of the South declared war against the North because they wanted to preserve slavery. In fact, they wanted to impose slavery in the North. Many of these guys that these monuments have been built to just came right out and said it. 9 years before that began, Frederick Douglass gave a speech saying, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" A good and important question. It continues to be a question because slavery is still legal in the United States. The 13th Amendment said that slavery can only exist under the color of law. If somebody is charged or convicted of a crime, then they can be held as a slave. And it's still going on in the United States. In fact, it's the main reason why we have more prisoners than any other country in the world, free labor. And then on top of that, we find that the police departments that get more 1033 equipment, they kill more people. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Okay, so John Pavlovitz, who is a, I believe, Unitarian minister and author, has written some very, very provocative stuff, very thoughtful stuff. He's got a website, johnpavlovitz.com. And over at his website, his blog from, I believe it was just a day or two ago, he tells this story about how he says 2 weeks ago, our family took a trip out of state, our first in 18 months. Everybody, it's him and his wife, their 16-year-old son, and their 11-year-old daughter. John, his wife, and their son, their 16-year-old son, they're all fully vaccinated, 2 shots. The daughter, 11 years old, can't be vaccinated because the FDA hasn't approved these vaccines yet for little kids, for under 16. So they take this trip, and he writes, a couple days into the trip, our daughter started complaining about headaches, which we attributed to the heat and general fatigue of travel and activity. The next day, she began to get congestion, said her throat was sore. They took her to a local clinic, and guess what? She's got COVID-19. So then he says, but we were all fully vaccinated, so we figured that, we could just hang out with her. We would isolate because she has COVID, but hey, we're all vaccinated. Turns out all 3 of them got COVID-19. He did, his wife did, and their son did. Now, their son was asymptomatic. He had no symptoms. His wife felt kind of crappy, and he said, I'm hopefully in the worst of it now. Congestion, headache, body aches, cough, fatigue. I lost my sense of taste and smell, which for a devoted foodie is torture. But overall, it feels like a very bad cold, which feels like good news, right? Because if you've been vaccinated, that's what happens if you get this Delta variant, which is what's ripping through the country. And then we've got, today in USA Today, almost half of U.S. reports rising cases. COVID-19 cases are up in nearly half of the United States, according to Johns Hopkins University. Alaska and Arkansas doubled their cases just in the past week. South Carolina and Kansas are up 50%. Hospitalized patients in Missouri jumped 30% over the 4th of July weekend. Missouri leads the nation in most cases per capita. And 95% of hospitalizations in the nation right now have been unvaccinated people, and virtually 99% of all deaths. So don't put your mask away yet, even if you're fully vaccinated. I mean, it's not going to kill you, but it might do some damage. So let's try to get this thing under control and get everybody vaccinated, and be careful. Have you had this experience? Has anybody in your family had a breakthrough infection? Are your neighbors vaccinated? Have you had any success in convincing people to get vaccinated?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And how do you think we should best deal with billionaires buying our Supreme Court and using racism, essentially, to prevent us from voting? Reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs, or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning, and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter.
Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space, excuse me. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being, it is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn, a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows.
Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So in addition to having our daily rant over at HartmannReport.com and the newsletter, Sue's newsletter, that has links to literally every story we talk about throughout the show over at ThomHartmann.com, and you can sign up. It's free. We also push out a video to people who are supporters of our program at ThomHartmann.com every week. And the one that goes out this week is about Loudoun County, Virginia's public schools. There is a group that is opposed to teaching critical race theory. It's called PACT, Parents Against Critical Theory. And they've been promoting the work of a guy who is among the people who marched in the so-called Unite the Right rally, where Heather Heyer was killed. The Jews will not replace us, black people will not replace us march. And he's just like making stuff up. It's really a remarkable, remarkable story. You can see the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I just want to add one final kind of mini rant here to some of the topics that I've been pointing out this morning. Donald Trump famously back in March of 2016 when he was running for president said, "I know more about taxes than any human being that God ever created." Right. And now he went to his rally. It turns out that the Trump organization has been paying, apparently they paid Ivanka like hundreds of thousands of dollars in, quote, consulting fees. And they've been paying for Alan Weisselberg's apartment and for his car and for his kids and grandkids to go to college and all these kind of things. Here's what it breaks down. And they've discovered that the Trump organization was keeping 2 sets of books. That's the big crime. Trump is trying to reinvent this as, they're upset about fringe benefits. These are not fringe benefits. 2 sets of books is tax fraud. And there's also bank fraud in this too, but the big one is the tax fraud right now. And so, if Trump wanted to deliver a little extra cash to Alan Weisselberg and friends, there's basically 3 ways he could do it. Number 1, he could raise their salaries. He could just pay them the money, and of course the government takes taxes out of it. Number 2, he could take the money himself, pay taxes on it, go to the bank, get some cash, and hand that cash to Alan Weisselberg as a gift. It would still be taxed. Donald Trump would have paid taxes on it. In fact, because he's in a higher tax bracket than Weisselberg, he would have paid even more taxes on it than had he paid it directly to Weisselberg. So, it's something that is very rarely done because it's kind of stupid. But, it's not illegal. It's just fine. Or option number 3, which is the one Donald Trump chose, was have the company write a check directly to Weisselberg's landlord, directly to the college, directly to the car dealer, as if it was buying things for the company, which is tax deductible, when in fact it was buying things for an employee, which is called tax fraud. And so, it's just like, where is this going to go? I'm thinking that this is not going to faze the Trump and Republican followers of Trump, the Trump followers and the Trump voters. They've known all along this guy was a cheat. They knew that he ripped people off with his phony university. They knew that his phony charity got shut down. They knew that he had cheated on every single one of his wives with whoever became his next wife. And then, with Melania, he had cheated on her with with a porn star and a Playboy bunny. They know this. They know that he bragged that he could grab any woman by the crotch that he wanted, or worse. They don't care. They want a fascist, and that's what he's providing them. So, anyhow, that's. I just wanted to toss that in there. Richard in Walton, West Virginia. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, I'm 79. Most of my life, I was a professional engineer. I retired early. Family sicknesses came, and I wound up broke. And so at 79, 78, I'm working for a fast food restaurant, packaging garbage, unloading trucks, and I start thinking about things. And I'll tell you, this country is not going to make it if we stay with the capitalist system. It is too corrupt. There are too many people who enjoy the good life to the point where they'll lie, cheat, go along with anything just to keep the good life. So we need to go to socialism. We're never going to go back through capitalism.
Yeah.
And I used to be a libertarian. I used to buy all that junk, and it's not true. We need to have a cooperative society, go to socialism if we're going to get back. In fact, if we're not going to slide much, much further into a hole, we need to do away with capitalism.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I
that's
get your
my
sentiment,
rant.
Richard. Capitalism has historically produced some benefits. You know, in fact, an awful lot of innovation and an awful lot of forward motion. The problem is when it's not heavily regulated. I mean, capitalism is essentially a sociopathic, parasitic form of type of economic system, but
And when
it
you
can
got
be.
everybody, I'm sorry.
No,
when everybody else is crooked and looking for an easy buck, that brings out the worst.
Right, and that's why you have to regulate it. Just like you wouldn't want, you wouldn't want the NFL to say, we've just decided we're going to take all the referees off the field and we're not going to enforce the rules anymore. If they did, football wouldn't even be fun to watch. People would just be ripping face masks off and punching people in the gut and all kinds of things. Sure. You have to have a set of rules and you have to enforce those rules. And what's been happening ever since the Reagan Revolution is that the rules that had made capitalism work for America for 200 years up until that point, those rules are getting ripped apart. And then, I think I agree with you. I think that we need to bring many of the elements of socialism, for example, a national health care system, free public education. I didn't get into this in the article today, but I think, housing as a right and food as a right should be in that list as well. And say, these are the basics. These are the, as a society, we are not going to fail people on these fundamental and a reasonable retirement. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt, back in 1912, ran on the square deal on his proposal that that there should be a higher minimum wage, there should be the right to unionize, that everybody should have have a job where they can take time off, that their health care should be provided for them, and they should have the right to housing. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Anyhow, Richard, thank you for your comments. Very well said. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I heard you mentioning or asking the question why we can't have nice things like Sweden does. And I lived there a long time, and I've lived here. And we can't have nice things because we don't want nice things. And we don't want nice things because we don't know any better.
I think it's more what Tyrone said earlier. We can't have nice things because there are white people who are afraid that if black people have nice things, that somehow those white people's privileges will be diminished. And that, that racism at the core of our society has been the thing that has prevented things like a national health care system. And if you look at it, it was particularly obvious prior to the 1980s. You look at these Southern senators, Democrats and Republicans, over the years, and they always objected to any kind of social programs because they were afraid that black people in their states would benefit from them.
Well, you use the word core, and that's there is a handful of people that are powerful and make decisions, and part of that reason is because we live in a country that doesn't vote. I mean, over 80% of Swedes vote who are registered to vote. It's radically less than that. But the best evidence is to look at why Biden won. Biden won because moderate conservatives voted for him. It was not progressives. It was not minorities. And, there's a very basic reason. I mean, if you live in Sweden or anywhere in Scandinavia, it's very easy to have a reasonable, rational decision about almost anything because you have a population that can read and that can speak. And you don't have that here, that basic level. And I'd give you an example in our national anthem, our Star-Spangled Banner. Are you acquainted with the last line of the first stanza of the Star-Spangled Banner?
You'll have to refresh my memory, Jonathan.
So the last line is, "Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?" What does it mean?
Are you asking me a question?
Oh, it was a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
But so what it means is it's referring to the Francis Scott Key is on the British warship looking at Fort McHenry and wondering if the flag is still up. But it's not a declarative sentence. It's an interrogative. It ends with a question mark. And, of course, Americans are so OCD that we can't sing all three stanzas. But how do you end a national anthem with a question mark? How do you sing it properly? I mean, why would you even have it as just a basic element of grammar? It's bizarre. No one's ever thought about it.
Yeah, and in the third stanza, you know, he celebrates the slaughter of the British Marine Corps. I forget what there was a specific name for it. It's in my article from last Thursday, and which was a regiment that was made up entirely of slaves who had fled slaveholders in Maryland. And Francis Scott Key himself was a slaveholder in Maryland.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Our national anthem is a little problem. And plus, it's terrible. It's very hard to sing. We'll be back. I like America the Beautiful. George in Los Angeles, listening on KPFK. Hey, George, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hope you're well. When I heard you say the Second Amendment's a failed experiment, I lunged across the bed for the phone. I'm sure you've read The Federalist 46 by Madison. So, the key point being that the whole people are armed, therefore nobody with tyrannical intentions in the federal government could ever raise a standing army that could defeat us, when the push comes to shove.
Yeah, George, I'm not buying that. And
well, I know you don't.
I'm sorry, I don't have Federalist 46 in front of me, but none of the founders suggested that the populace of America should be armed in order to take down its own government. Nobody
That's wrong.
ever
that's not
suggested
true.
that. Yes.
46 says it.
No, it does not.
It does too, Tom. How can you say that?
George, I'm just telling you, it's not the case. I know that argument was made by a 17-year-old high school student in the Rifleman magazine in 1976. That was when it first appeared a big way in the American landscape in the NRA magazine. And the NRA started promoting it, but it is not the case. Thank you for the call. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm glad you had a nice weekend with your family.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we weren't able to have ours over because both of them are unvaccinated, but that's not why I called.
Oh, my.
It's just there's nothing I have ever been able to say to reach them. But anyway, I called about the fact of the terrible spike in gun violence over the weekend. 500 shootings during our holiday weekend, 233 dead, many injured. What do you attribute this sudden surge in violence to? Because I'm at a loss. I've lived a long time. I'm around your age, a little older. But I've never in my lifetime seen anything remotely like the violence we're seeing now. What do you think is causing this?
There was an article that I read maybe 2 months ago, and I'm sorry that I can't, off the top of my head, remember where I read it or the exact number. But it essentially said that that between my recollection was 50 million. It might have been 30 or 40 million, but whatever. Tens of millions of guns were sold during the time that we were in lockdown. Guns were the 2020 was the best year for gun sales, probably in history. If not in history, then probably the second best year for gun sales after the year that Barack Obama became president, 2009. And that was the year that there was a nationwide gun shortage and an ammunition shortage and all this kind of stuff. And it was, white people arming up because there was a black guy in the White House. And, it's just, that was, I think it's fairly obvious. If you have more guns, you're going to have more gun deaths. It's a pretty straightforward thing. Our caller dropped off the board. I'm not sure why, but I think that's the reason. It's, it's just like, hey, if you add 10% more cars to the city of Portland, you're going to probably have more accidents. You're going to have more collisions. You're going to have more rear-ending. You're going to have more road rage. You're going to have more people breaking the law. I mean, it's just more guns, more shootings. It shouldn't surprise anybody. We'll be back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. By the way, Federalist 46 is talking. This is the whole argument that we shouldn't have a standing army during times of peace. It has nothing to do with whether you and I should have a gun to overthrow the government. It was the idea that we should have state militias who could stand up. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at hartmannreport.com. And our podcast, our 1 hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
Well, Mr. Hartmann, I hope you had a great weekend. And
I did.
I wanted to. It was quiet. I find that the Independence Day to be a time of quiet reflection, and so that's what it was for me. But in any event, the topic that you've been talking about Sweden and Norway and the European countries, Tyrone was dead on point, and you and I have had this discussion before. If you look at those countries and look at the percentage of black people in those countries, it's demonstrably lower than in the United States. And one of the reasons that you don't have those types of programs in the United States is because white people, European Americans, do not want to share that pie with the people that many of them think are inferior. I'm not going to do that. That's what that's the mentality. For instance, take when schools were desegregated, and I lived through some of that. That was public education, and white people sent their kids to public schools all the time. It wasn't a problem. All of a sudden, when the schools got desegregated, white people started busing their children. I mean, when busing started, white people started taking their children out of schools. You, at the break on free speech, talked about the 13th Amendment and how slavery is still legalized by the 13th Amendment. What is the largest population of people that are in prison? What is that ethnic group? So they're black people. This is the issue. It's the fabric of this country. And then you had a guy talk about the national anthem, and he failed to mention that Francis Scott Key in his third verse said, and that's no refuge could save the hiring enslaved from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. Right. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. And over the weekend, I wrote a piece about the American flag because most people have no idea what those symbols mean.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I would go beyond what you just suggested. You started out by saying that you've got basically white people who don't want black people to have good things. I think it goes even beyond that. When I was doing the research for this book, The Hidden History of American Healthcare, that'll be out in a few weeks, the thing that shocked me so much that I learned was this guy, Frederick Hoffman. He was actually a German immigrant. This was in the late 19th century, although he lived in right up until the late 1940s. And he was the vice president of the Prudential Insurance Company. And he wrote a book called Race Traits of the American Negro. And he traveled around America preaching that black people were so inferior that if we simply, that without slavery, they would ultimately die out. But to hurry that up, to speed up that die out process, we had to make sure that they didn't have access to things like health insurance. And he peddled that, and it was purchased. I mean, that you know, hook, line, and sinker, that was the sales pitch that he was using, that his insurance company was using, that his allies were using, that the American Medical Association, which was all white up until the 1960s, was using, that hospital associations were using to deny health care to black people, particularly in states with large black populations. And to a large extent, it was about power. I mean, you had in Georgia and in South Carolina in particular, you had a white power structure that was genuinely and legitimately afraid of a black takeover, essentially, as happened immediately, you know, after the Civil War in South Carolina. You know, and you know, they were afraid of retribution, essentially. Now, the retribution never came. In fact, no black people were ever even talking seriously. You know, no movement to, oh, let's go kill white people. You know, after the Civil War, but nonetheless, that was the thing. They, you know, this is about maintaining white supremacy, Kenyatta, beyond just, hey, let's keep nice things from white people, if I may.
Oh. Well, listen, that's absolutely the case. And to further what you're saying, I'm sure you're familiar as you have, as you're finishing up your book, or as it is about to come out. And I'm actually working on something kind of similar. In an article, there was about James Marion Sims, who was known as the father of U.S. or American gynecology. Yeah. And he said that they did horrible things to black women. Horrible. Most of the things that are used in a gynecologist office, particularly speculum and some other things, but things that you just can't imagine.
Oh, he did vivisection, essentially. I mean, it was like, you know, dissections of living people on black women.
Without
anesthetic.
Anesthesia, because he said that black people did not feel pain. Right. Black women did not feel pain.
He didn't just say it, he wrote it. I mean, this influences, you know, American medicine to this day. It's breathtaking when you dig into this history and you see, you know, it's just mind-boggling. It's just
yes, it is
mind-boggling, and we are all still living with it. And people like yourself who are black are suffering from it, and people like me who are white are also suffering from it, because this entire political system that has evolved out of this, that now conspires to keep people from voting and to keep all Americans from having good things, because God forbid black people will have them. It's insane. It's just insane. Kenyatta, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Always good to hear from you. We'll be right back. We're hitting the top of the hour. Stick around. Up next, can America now just admit the Second Amendment is a failure?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code TOM. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
For our book club today, we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things,
And the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A fascinating piece over at Daily Kos by Mark Sumner on the Daily Kos staff. The title is "The Second Amendment is a Failed Experiment, and it's time for reasonable people to admit that fact." This weekend, over 400 shootings, 150 fatalities. People are wondering, why is there this sudden increase in gun violence? Well, it's because there's been a sudden increase in guns. Tens of millions of guns were sold during the COVID time. It was like one of the top 5 years in the history of the United States for gun sales, 2020. And you get more guns, you're going to have more shootings. I mean, it's just like, you have more cars, you're going to have more car accidents. Talk to anybody who lives in a big city who has to deal with rush hour. The more cars, the more car accidents. The more guns, the more shootings. Intentional, unintentional, a whole bit. And last month, Missouri joined the ranks of states that have passed preemptive legislation that says if the federal government decides that AR-15s, weapons of war essentially, or other semi-automatic weapons, are not approved weaponry any longer. And the Heller decision allows for this, by the way. The Supreme Court's Heller decision that found that the Second Amendment encompasses the right to self-defense is very clear that the government may determine which guns constitute legitimate instruments of self-defense as opposed to which are essentially offensive weapons used in war. We already banned, for example, fully automatic machine guns or fully automatic weapons. We banned, shoulder-fired ground-to-air missiles or shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles, or there's a bunch of stuff that we ban. We ban IEDs, even though they're easier to get and make than guns. But Missouri Governor Mike Parson says, you've had the Vice President of the United States, this is the Republican governor of Missouri, when he's signing this legislation saying that we will essentially overrule any federal gun control legislation. Mike Parson says, you've had the Vice President of the United States get up in an open forum when she was running for president, if you remember this, and any particular weapon she decided she didn't like, she was going to come into your house, open to your front door, and take it away. Well, in Missouri, she's not. Well, if you don't remember Kamala Harris ever saying that, it's because she never did, as Mark Sumner points out. All she said was that she would use, if she became president, and legislators refused to enact, quote, reasonable gun safety laws, end quote, she'd consider doing it by executive action. But this fantasy, as Mark Sumner calls it, is just spreading across the country. I mean, in Texas, Tennessee, Iowa, they're using this record gun violence, which is, in my opinion, a consequence of a record number of guns, as a way to loosen their gun laws, which is nuts. The Second Amendment was passed for it passed the way it was for two principal reasons. The first reason was why it was written in the first place. And that was that the people who were writing the Constitution were well aware of the fact that armies can be corrupted, that armies can take on their own political nature because they have the force of arms. They have, they have the ability to take lives. Armies have considerable political power, or can acquire considerable political power out of that. And in fact, in Federalist 46, Hamilton talks about, what might happen if the Army gets corrupted. And the corruption of the Army would be, in his case, via the commander-in-chief. He says, he's talking about a military force for the projects of ambition. He said the people in the state should, he calls this an extravagant supposition. Let's say that the people of the United States should, for a sufficient period, elect an uninterrupted succession of men ready to betray both their country and their military. That the traitors should, throughout this period, uniformly and systematically pursue some fixed plan for the extension of the military establishment. And in other words, you would have somebody take over the country. This is what Hamilton is describing here, is what Donald Trump tried to do with the military in the United States on January 6th, where he was trying, and frankly at Lafayette Square, where he was trying to get the military to attack American civilians. We have laws against it, which is why it didn't happen. But Hamilton is saying, this is a possibility. And so the way that we solve this problem is we have militias within the states. Each state has its own militia. And at that point in time, every state did have its own militia. The militias in the North were just good old-fashioned militias. They were regulated by the states. They were well regulated by the states, in fact. And the militias in the South tended to do double duty as slave patrols. Explicitly, in South Carolina and Georgia, their entire militia was also their entire slave patrol. To a slightly lesser extent in Virginia and North Carolina. So when they passed the Second Amendment, the goal was to allow state militias, and it was in combination with the place in Article 1, Section 8, where the only thing that the founders, the framers of the Constitution, the only place where they limit the power of Congress to appropriate money, the only limitation on raising and spending or borrowing and spending money is for the military. In Article 1, Section 8, it says that no money shall be appropriated for the military that lasts more than 2 years. I'm paraphrasing, but you can read it. It's in the Constitution. And that's why, and what that means is that at the end of 2 years, the military ceases to exist, or at least the Army. The Navy wouldn't cease to exist. This is specifically about the Army. It would cease to exist if it wasn't renewed every 2 years. And this is because about half the founders, and Hamilton was among them, believed that instead of having a standing army during time of peace, now there is a provision in the Constitution for the president to call up to create a standing army during times of conflict, but during times of peace that there should be no standing army because it could be corrupted and it could turn against its own country. And the way you prevent that is you have state militias. And, and he goes on and he talks about this. Besides the advantage of being armed, which the American people possess over almost every other nation, the existence of subordinate governments to which the people are attached and by which the militia officers are appointed. In other words, state militias forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition. So that was the goal, the reason it was first written was to provide a plan B if the federal army was shut down during time of peace, which Jefferson actually tried to do. When he came into office, there were over 300,000 men in 1801 in the Army. When he left office, it was fewer than 6,000, which at the same time, the state militias didn't get elevated, and that's why we had such a problem in the War of 1812, which, came along just 4 years after Jefferson left office. But this is all like ancient history. Now, it's been, reinterpreted and reread repeatedly over the years, but I would say that, you know, the Second Amendment is, you know, officially an anachronism. Why don't we just join the rest of the developed world and have reasonable limits? You know, I'm a sports shooter. I enjoy target practice. I do it, you know, I go back to Michigan, I do it with my brothers. I've done it with my kids. I'm not opposed to guns. What I am saying is that this wild explosion of guns and the associated fantasy that we are intended, that the founders intended us to all have guns so that if the government ever became oppressive, we could overthrow it. No, at the very most, if you want to go down that road, it was that state militias would be a defense against a federal army for that state. But that the state militias would be authorized by the state governments. I mean, you know, Hamilton comes right out and says that in Federalist 46, lays it out. But, you know, this has just gone off the rails, I would say. So, you know, what do we do with that? I think that it's a reasonable time as we're seeing hundreds of gun deaths over a weekend to say, wait a minute, have we misunderstood this? Have we gone down the wrong road here? Are we essentially feeding a form of insanity?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I think the answer is, yeah, we have. What do we do about that? That's something where we should have a national conversation, Frank, in my opinion. And welcome back. Let's see here. Ruth in West Los Angeles. Hey, Ruth, what's up?
Thank you very much.
Hey, Ruth? I think Ruth is not listening to her phone. Joyce, you might want to check it out. Let's see here. Tom in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, I wanted to talk about that Second Amendment. A lot of people don't realize that those militias were formed as slave rebellion units to put down slave rebellion.
In the southern states, yeah.
Yes, yes. And then not only that, Washington, General and George, basically didn't like him because they were so unprofessional. They'd either fight, run, or not show up.
The state militias?
Correct.
Huh.
Correct. It was basically a bone of peace to keep them in line and allow them to, if there was a slave rebellion, stop it. Andrew Jackson, in the defense of New Orleans, specifically asked, this was before the Louisiana Purchase was made, there was a black militia unit who was so professional that he asked for them. And during that Battle of New Orleans, it was 8,000 British versus 3,000 of his soldiers, and they beat him.
Wow.
He wanted another battalion of them, and they refused. And then they disarmed that group, and that group actually helped put down slave rebellions, black on black. But everybody was so afraid, all the southern states, like, oh, no, we can't arm the blacks. That isn't going to work. So basically, this is a carryover, I believe, of a form of keeping white supremacy. You know, the whole state militia. I mean, I'm an ex-vet. I used to be a Republican until Trump was elected. I gave him a break for a year and a half, then I did a deep dive, and I changed parties. When I found out what a criminal the guy was, I said, no way. You know, I looked at his past. I looked at his father, who was part of the American Nazi Party.
And arrested at a Klan rally. Fred was.
Yeah, 1921. The giant riot they had in New York where 1,000 police attacked people. And he never, ever apologized for the Central Park Five that he said was guilty and should be killed and hanged, and they were innocent.
Yeah, and he bought a full-page ad in the New York Times saying, put them to death. yeah. No, I get it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not familiar with the history of the Battle of New Orleans, so I can't comment specifically on what you had to say, Tom. But it you know, it sounds interesting. But the state militias, you know, very much were a real thing. And in the South, they were large, as you point out, they were largely used to put down or prevent slave rebellions, and there were a lot of them. You know, people do not easily submit to being held in slavery, in bondage, and
exactly.
you know, we created essentially a fascist police state in the South in order to maintain slavery, and that's what went to war against the United States of America in 1861. Tom, thanks for the call. Amazing times we live in, huh? 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com, we have, you know, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter's extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and you know, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I got to tell you about the Weather Channel, by the way. This is absolutely fascinating. The Weather Channel is planning major changes. This article over at Raw Story. The Weather Channel is planning major changes to its coverage to focus on the impact of climate change. The president, the CEO, a fellow by the name of Zimmett, the chief content officer and executive vice president, Nora Zimmett, told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, quote, "Our viewers are seeing it on their doorsteps. It's impacting them in ways never before seen. Industries such as farming are saying they've never seen such crazy weather patterns. Many natural disasters are being linked to climate change. The evidence has become overwhelming. Young people are shouting about it on the rooftops." So the Weather Channel says we're going to start covering climate change, essentially, as a dimension of our weather forecasts. So what's the response on the right? Well, on Tuesday, today, the New York Times is reporting that Fox News is moving ahead with plans to create their own weather channel. It's going to be called Fox Weather, 24/7 streaming channel that promises to do for 7-day forecasts what Fox has done for American politics, financial news, and sports. In other words, what? Fill it with lies and racism? It's... well, you know, I mean, maybe they're going to hire Donald Trump and his Sharpie to do the weather, right? Here's the cone. Oh, no, it's way over here. Yes. Very strange stuff. I think that when you reach the point where weather has become politicized, you have really fallen deep into the rabbit hole. It's and this is where our country is at now, where you've got right-wing channels that will not talk about the weather. They would much rather talk about critical race theory or something like that than talk about the fact that We had 110 degree heat here in Portland for 3 days in a row. Something that, we were hotter than Las Vegas. We were approaching Death Valley temperature. We were hotter than Dubai. That there are cities in Bangladesh right now where it's over 126 degrees. Literally, you cannot survive without air conditioning. And this is happening not just in the United States, it's happening all over the world. There are people who will say, well, back in the 1930s, we had the Dust Bowl. And yeah, we deforested much of the North American continent. The consequence of that was the Dust Bowl. And yes, we did have some local weather, really significant local weather changes as a result of, hundreds of thousands of acres, millions of acres being deforested. And yes, Franklin Roosevelt largely reversed that with the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, in the 1930s, where he put 1 million men to work planting trees. And we reforested America. And you can spot those trees. They're all about 1.5 feet in diameter right now. You make them, about 100 years old, about 90 years old. And those were trees, and particularly, Louise and I used to drive all over Michigan. And you drive up into northern Michigan, and as you're driving through the, on the freeway, on the highway, I think it's 96, you see the forest on either side, and you look back into that forest, and it's like perfect rows. Absolute perfect rows. Yes, we put the forest back together. But that was local climate change caused by local terraforming, local, changes in the geography, essentially, as it related to the weather. But this is now happening planet-wide for the first time in human history. We've been on this, humans more or less, and proto-humans around 3 million years, modern humans 300,000 years. We have never seen anything like this before. And there's a real challenge here. Is climate change going to destroy human civilization? It already has in some areas. I mean, you've got some parts of the world where it is literally breaking down civilizations, or at least civilized life. I'd say, the Arab Spring was an example of that, and it's continuing in that region. It's happening in Central America right now. So, good on the Weather Channel that they're going to start reporting what's actually going on in the weather. And get ready for Fox Weather. The bubble expands, right? You want to live in a reality-free zone? We'll be back with your calls.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's your media support group for we the people of the United States of America. We'll be right back.
For our book club today, we're reading from Thomas Frank's book, Rendezvous with Oblivion, Reports from a Sinking Society. This is chapter 1, titled Servile Disobedience. Social scientists have tried for more than a century to understand how class works. Psychological experiments on the subject, however, are a relatively novel thing. So I was surprised to discover a few years ago the psychologists had published a series of papers on the behavioral aspects of social status, and that their findings were almost uniformly unflattering towards society's winners. In one 2009 study in Psychological Science found that in conversations with strangers, high-status people tend to do more doodling and fidgeting, and also to use fewer engagement cues, looking at the other person, laughing, nodding their heads. A 2010 paper published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that lower-class individuals, in quote, turned out to be better performers on measures of such pro-social virtues as generosity, charity, and helpfulness. A third study found that those of higher status were noticeably worse at assessing the emotions of others or figuring out what facial expressions mean. All of which is to say the rich are different from you and me. They are more rude and less generous. They don't understand, they don't get what others are thinking, and apparently they don't really care. Perhaps this is obvious to you. After all, people don't design toxic debt obligations by calling out what they learned in Sunday school. Still, the research aroused media interest. The Christian Science Monitor's 2010 account of one study ended with this quotation from Michael Krauss, then the University of California, San Francisco, who was one of the researchers, quote, "Being empathic is one of the first steps to helping other people. One of the first things we're really interested in is what can make wealthy people, affluent people, the people with the capacity to give, what can make them empathic?" I think I see the urgency of Dr. Krauss's question. After all, we have spent the past several decades doing everything we could to transfer the wealth of the nation into the bank accounts of the affluent to send them victorious, happy, and glorious long to reign after us, over us. Oh, we've cut their taxes, gladly transferring much of the cost of keeping their property safe onto our own shoulders. We've furnished them with special megaphones so that their voices can be heard over the hubbub of the crowd. We've conferred upon them separate and better schools, their very own transportation system, and a full complement of private security guards. We've built an entire culture of courtiers and sycophants to make their every working hour an otherworldly delight. We let them construct a system of bonuses and executive compensation on the theory that it would be good for everyone if the people at the top got to take home much, much more than the rest of us. And when it turned out that the theory was wrong, that in the most famous cases, executives chased bonuses not to the shareholders' benefit, but at their expense, why, we promptly bailed them out. We allowed them to step into the Fed's discount window and fill their pockets. We generously transferred their reckless investments to our balance sheet, and we chastised them with little more than a polite request that they please not do it again. We've done everything we can to lift them up and exalt them as the new Leviathan. The least they can do in return, one feels, is to show a little empathy. Besides, look what we've done with the old Leviathan, the government. For decades, we've attacked it, redirected it, outsourced it, and filled it with incompetence and cronies. Yes, it still works well enough when we need to blow up some small country, but those branches of it designed to help our Americans of lower socioeconomic status, in quotes, as the scientists would put it, are now bare. We need the rich to be nice. We need them to stop doodling, paying and to pay attention and get generous. Now that the government has divested from the empathy business, we need the rich to discover brotherly love, and fast. Come to think of it, wasn't that supposed to be the deal in the first place? The arrangement Andrew Carnegie brokered over a century ago when he made his big career move from Steel King to public library baron? The laissez-faire social contract would grant private business a free hand, but in exchange, those who piled up massive wealth were supposed to extend a magnanimous hand to the rest of us. As Carnegie wrote in his famous 1889 essay, The Gospel of Wealth, we don't need socialism to solve our problems. Philanthropy is the true antidote for the temporary inequality distribution of wealth and reconciliation of the rich and poor, quoting Carnegie. Going further, Carnegie argued that the duty of the man of wealth was, quote, to consider all surplus revenues which come to him simply as trust funds, which he's called upon to administer in the manner which, in his judgment, is best calculated to produce the most beneficial results for the community. The man of wealth thus becoming the mere trustee and agent for his poorer brethren, end quote. That same way of thinking led Carnegie to support the estate tax. Of all forms of taxation, this seems the wisest, he wrote. It was wise because it would, quote, induce the rich man to attend to the administration of wealth during his life. And if he didn't, then the tax would return most of his hoardings to the community from which it came, using Carnegie's words. Vestiges of the Carnegie attitude survive to this day. 2009 study of high net worth individuals by Barclays Wealth confirmed that American philanthropists tend to understand their giving in a context in which the state is either absent or irrelevant. And of course, there are plenty of nice plutocrats who don't fidget or doodle when talking to strangers and who have no problem endowing a ward or a wing in return for a commemorative plaque. The business headlines even occasionally tell of billionaires coming together under the leadership of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates to donate their fortunes to worthy causes. But the billionaires with the strongest sense of class solidarity have a very different plan for their disposable income, activating their lobbyists in Washington, building grassroots movements to march on their behalf, and using their media properties to run experiments on human credulity.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our newsletter, our regular newsletter that Sue puts together every day. It's got a link in it to every single article that I talk about on the air. so you can see, the backup for everything that I have to say. It's free. There's some ads in it that just, pay for it basically, but that's it. There's that. And then, of course, over at HartmannReport.com, also no charge, there is our daily rant. So those are two things on the internet that we have. We also, periodically put up videos specifically for the people who are supporters of our program. And you can find our most recent one. It's about guns. This sheriff in Volusia County, the sheriff deputy there, asking the media, where have we gone wrong when a 14-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy are having a shootout with deputies? And Texas passing this bizarre new gun law. Anyhow, it's all over at ThomHartmann.com. You can find it right there. Check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Bill in Smoky Point, Washington says you disagree with me here, Bill, so you go to the front of the line. What's up?
Yeah, Tom, I don't think the whole gun thing's going to do anything. I mean...
Which gun thing?
They've been fighting guns, trying to fight it. Okay, gun owners are too large a portion of the population.
They're actually not. And in fact, people who own more than 1 or 2 or 3 guns is a very, very small percentage of the population.
I have 16.
Say that again?
I have 16.
You have 16 guns.
Little shots and
yeah, you are an outlier. Very few people have 16 weapons, and they're
not weapons. They're intricate
toys?
machineries that fascinate me.
Yeah, okay. Well, they're weapons too, and that is the problem.
What is the biggest obstacle for the Democrats getting education, health care? They're sacrificing the climate, health care, education, and everything else that could stop that could help cut back on the violence, fighting mechanical objects that you can throw in a lake and they'll never do anything.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, Bill, that by trying to put into place gun control, Democrats are going to activate Republican activists who are single-issue voters. It's the same thing with abortion. And the Republicans have successfully put together this coalition. And there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. And that's why I think that the Democrats have been kind of strategically ignoring this issue for the better part of 15 years. But, right now what we've got is that
they could get the gun owners on their side, and we would never see another Republican in office.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All they would have to do that is leave the actual guns alone and get some kind of an identification program in place.
Well, my proposal is that we just treat guns the way we treat cars. That you have to have liability insurance, that you have to register the gun, and you have to have a permit. You have to have a gun, a shooter's license.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, and this is straightforward stuff, and it would clean up an awful lot. Bill, thanks for the call. Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Yeah, I can't. With the gun discussion, I can't help but going back to, Bill Ruger made the comment back in 1992. And now, for those who don't know, Bill Ruger was a firearms manufacturer, and he actually proposed magazine limits back in 1992 in an open letter to Congress. And
they were passed in 93, weren't they? Or was it 95? Because it expired 10 years later. It was passed through reconciliation, and it expired during the George W. Bush presidency.
Yeah, and the shift of the owners community has changed so much over the past 40 years, 50 years, because in 1974 I was like 16 and was really interested in hunting and all this. I got a firearms encyclopedia in there. And as part of the definition of assault weapons, it says some assault rifles are produced only in semi-automatic form for sale as sporting arms. They are excellent on military style of target, but have little application in hunting. Now, they tricked a lot of those out, to make them like hunting weapons, but you don't need anything like that for actual hunting. And the problem is now for a lot of, with COVID and all this going on, the manufacturers are, cranking out some rounds of ammunition, like some like 223s, like for use in the AR-15 types. but they're ignoring, what the other, regular, the old sales sporting arms realm.
No, I'm with you. I just found the numbers for 2020. The industry and firearms background checks show nearly 23 million guns were purchased in 2020. Those are the legal gun sales, and illegal gun sales, or not unregulated gun sales, let's call it, because without FBI background checks, gun sales at by mail, online, or in gun shows and things like that constitute about 40% of that market. So probably the actual number was around 40 million guns were added to America last year. This is in Wyoming. In the year 2020, there were 15 guns sold for every 100 adults living in Wyoming. That's in 1 year. Alabama, Alaska, and Montana tied for second place with 14 guns sold per 100 adults in those states. So it's like I said, you get more guns, you're going to get more deaths. I think it's very straightforward, and Mark, spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. Rebecca in Seattle. Hey, Rebecca, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just a couple things. Wanted to echo the previous caller who had mentioned that the Second Amendment was written in order to put down the slave revolt. I recently became familiar with a new book that's come out called The Second by Carol Anderson. It's called The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America.
Yes.
And there she details how the Second Amendment was written to empower local militia groups to put down slave revolts and protect plantation owners. She was just featured yesterday, actually, on Democracy Now! For folks that just want a little blurb and not have to read the whole book.
Sure.
But just wanted to put that out there, that seems to be...
And I laid this out 3 years ago in a book called The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. And I used the same source material that Carol Anderson did, which is basically the Virginia Ratifying Convention, where Patrick Henry got up and gave his long speech. And Sally... what's her last name? She wrote Slave Patrols. The book. Sally Hayden wrote a book called Slave Patrols. That's a great primary source. Well, actually, she references primary source material. So spot on, Rebecca. Thank you very much for that, and I appreciate it. James in Burnsville, West Virginia. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Mr. Hartman. I'm glad to see you're not sweating as bad today.
No, the air conditioning is working. Well, plus it was only 61 when I walked into work today. I mean, that's how weird that 120 or 116 degree weather here was. But yeah, we're on the backside of it. So what's up, James?
Well, I wanted to bring up about the AK-47s and the other weapons that in the military.
Mm-hmm.
All you have to do is put an internal magazine in those weapons that can't be changed out, that will only take 5 rounds. And another thing is, if you go buy a weapon, you have to show proof that you went somewhere and been trained on how to handle a gun, much like hunter safety.
Yeah.
You wouldn't hand a car to somebody without training them how to drive a car. So why not do the same thing with the...
Well, that's the conclusion that I came to in my book on the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. One of the primary conclusions was that we should regulate guns the way we regulate cars. Nobody complains about that. It seems entirely reasonable. You register it, you get a driver's license. In this case, it'd be a shooting license. You prove proficiency and knowledge of safety in the law, and you have liability insurance. Now, there are people who want to go farther than that. They want to make getting a gun like getting an abortion. They want you to have to have a 3-day waiting period. They want to you have to submit yourself to watching a video of pictures of people being shot and killed and mutilated bodies and things. They want you to be able to have to be provided with alternatives to buying a gun. Once you've told them exactly why you want the gun. All the restrictions that we try to put in front of women to getting an abortion being applied to guns. I'm not in favor of going that far, but I think that it's an interesting point. But spot on. James, thanks for the call. Wale in Manhattan, New York. Hey, Wale, what's up?
How you doing?
I'm well. What's on your mind?
Oh, that's good. It's a lot of things I would like to say to you. I know you don't have the time.
Pick one.
Okay, I'm going to pick about 3 real quick.
Pick one.
Okay, the evangelicals say that, okay, well, I won't say what the evangelicals are saying. When you say that white people don't want blacks to, to do better because then it's taking something away from them, was that your personal opinion or was that something you read? And can you let me say one more other thing before you answer that?
Sure.
The evangelicals, like I listen to Swagger. Am I allowed to say Jimmy Swagger?
Sure.
Sometimes I listen to his program because I am a programmed Christian.
Yeah. I used to, back when I was a teenager, I used to listen to Jimmy Swagger.
From little, and I think Christians tend to be, it's not that we like abuse, but we're programmed to be abused. Like that's the Christian thing.
Yeah.
So when the evangelicals get on, they claim that the climate is not. It's not that we're doing nothing wrong to change the climate. That it's natural. These are natural occurrences.
Yeah.
And then they use this scripture from the Old Testament. I forget which one was saying that nothing's going to change. That the climate doesn't change, or something to that effect. But first of all, do me a favor. I know you got a break, but answer the question about the whites being afraid.
I will on the other side of the break. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Actually, I will right now. I mean, just look at any history of the Confederacy. That's what we're still seeing right now. And that goes way beyond what I said. And welcome back. Lynn in Palmer, Alaska. Hey, Lynn, you've got an insight into the Weather Channel that I don't think I knew about. Tell me about it.
Yeah, Tom, I think it's quite interesting. Byron Allen, comedian and now media mogul, he owns the Weather Channel. Mm-hmm. Byron Allen has also taken on the cable networks. He sued them because they wouldn't allow him to have his channels on their networks. Another interesting thing, he also is in the process of suing McDonald's because they aren't spreading around their advertising dollars with the black advertisers in the black community.
He's a black man.
Black man, comedian.
Wow.
So he may be an interesting guest for you to have on.
Yeah, it would be fascinating to hear his thoughts on all this. And also, I did see the interview yesterday with Carol Anderson on Amy. Quite fascinating. Yeah.
I have to get her book.
Yeah, Carol is good. What was the book she wrote before that? White Rage, yeah. And One Person, No Vote. I've read all 3 of her books. Her most recent book, Racing Guns in a Fatally Unequal America, is brilliant. And, it covers a lot of the territory I covered in Guns in the Second Amendment. It does, frankly, a better job of it. And also talks about, and I didn't really get into this in a lot of detail. My book is much shorter than hers. But she goes into the detail of the actual terror that these slave owners felt, at the possibility that the people that they had enslaved and brutalized and raped and tortured, throughout their whole entire lives, might acquire the power to say, hey, turnabout is fair play. And it animated this movement toward militarizing, particularly the South, but America in general. And frankly, I think we're still there. And it's now it's not slave owners, it's just people who have benefited historically from these inequalities from that were established with slavery and the genocide of Native Americans.
Right, I agree, and this is our American history we all need to know.
Yeah, I mean, you can't solve problems if you don't understand their genesis, and we're just constantly ignoring this. Thank you very much for the call, Lynn. That was a good one. Carl in Ashley, Ohio. Hey, Carl, what's up?
Thank you, Tom. I was thinking that manufacturers for guns should make them do ballistics before they go out the door. That way, you know which guns have which bullets. And, it's crime scene, you pull the bullets out. And
kind of know that when you buy the gun. Here's a 40 caliber Ruger, or Taurus actually makes a very good 40 caliber semi-automatic pistol.
Oh, I'm just saying,
here's a 38.
Slightly different. The bullets are different, so each gun has its own fingerprint, so to speak.
Yeah, well, and there are different kinds of rounds that you can buy, from you know, ones that basically explode inside a human body to ones that will penetrate, you know, go straight through the, you know, but
I think most of them leave enough for some landing grooves in the bullet, though. You know, that it seems like...
Yeah, no, the rifling in the barrel will mark the bullet in a way that is like a fingerprint. You're absolutely right on that, Carl. Carl, thanks a lot for the call. It's, you know, the question, I guess, is what do we do with this knowledge? So we'll be back with more of your calls right after this. Stick around. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at thomhartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at hartmannreport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com and at hartmannreport.com. And welcome back. Richard in Detroit. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm fine.
I just want to say that the gun control issue is really a losing issue for Democrats, you know, because most of the people I know, well, I won't say most people, but a lot of people I know are Democrats, and most of them own guns. You know, just yesterday I purchased my sixth gun. Mm-hmm. And so to choose the gun control issue as the one that really willing to fight so hard over, you're going to turn off your own voters at the same time. You're going to motivate the right wing.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that if it was, I totally understand what you're saying, Richard, and the Republicans have been playing this thing like a fiddle, along with abortion. I mean, these are the two big issues that they use, single issues that they use. Now they're trying to add critical race theory to that mix to get a trifecta, you know, to win the 2022 elections. And you're absolutely right. That said, when you add 40 million guns to a country in 1 year, and then you see an explosion in gun violence, doesn't it seem like it's time to have a reasonable discussion on how we limit gun ownership to people who appropriately can and will use guns, as opposed to the people who are shooting up our streets?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that maybe Democrats should message better on that fact.
I think so.
Don't regulate the guns, regulate the people that own guns. You know, too many times the right wing controls the message and they say they're trying to take our guns, and that becomes the only thing we hear.
Yeah, I know. And it will be, as long as they do that. And actually, at the moment, I mean, I put this topic on the schedule today. Louise and I did this morning when we were looking around, because, you know, it is, we had all these deaths, all these gun shootings over the weekend. And what I find fascinating is that Democrats are talking about gun violence in America, and gun violence is what's up. Republicans are talking about crime. And there are some places and some ways and areas where crime is up, mostly petty crime, and most of that seems to be associated with homelessness, you know, as a consequence of the economic crash and COVID and all this kind of stuff. But the real rise in crime that we should be worrying about is homicide, and it's almost entirely being done with guns. And like I said, you add 40 million guns to a country in 1 year, it shouldn't surprise you if you suddenly start seeing a lot of gun deaths. So I think that this is an issue that we can't pretend doesn't exist, and we do need to pay attention to. Richard, thank you for the call. Francesco in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Francesco, what's up?
Yes, hi, Tom. I really love your show and appreciate it. I appreciate it more because I'm in Florida, a transplanted New Yorker. So I have my issues down here. I just wanted to say this dovetails into what you're talking about, I think, in every way. After the 2001 election, I started to call and do whatever I can to make people aware that with the Electoral College, we were going to have a president that represented less and less of the American people. Now I've come to feel that with the structure, and I was told at that time, well, there's no way procedurally to change the Electoral College, et cetera, et cetera. Now I see there's some movement in the direction of mitigating the injustice of the Electoral College. But in any case, now I see the much bigger obstacle to the representing the American people is the structure of the Senate. How can you have 10 states have a minute relative population, and they control the policies of the United States because each state gets 2 senators. Now, I think this dovetails into your talk about gun control because I think most Americans would be for sensible gun control, but because of the structure of the Senate, it will not happen. And that applies to lots of policies that most of the American people are for.
Yeah, I agree, and this is one of the reasons why it would be a good thing to have D.C. and Puerto Rico added as states. It would add a little more diversity to the to the Senate, and frankly, I think California and New York should split into 2 states each, but that's not going to happen. But go ahead.
No, I just feel like the Electoral College that when I first started talking about it, people will say, well, nothing will ever, there won't be any movement on that because of all the procedural issues. I think people have to at least start looking at this and realizing that the American people will not be represented.
Yeah.
As long as this is structurally the way it is.
Yeah, and there is a movement to have states pass these state laws. I mean, let's keep in mind, the last time a Republican seized the White House with a majority of the votes of the United States was 1993, and it was George Herbert Walker Bush. That was literally the last time. It has been, going on 30 years since a Republican won the White House with the majority of American votes. So, Francesco, thanks a lot for the call. Martin Sheen is up next. Who is Gary Davis, and what does it mean to be a citizen of the world? This is going to be fascinating. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info is available at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. EasyFlow, personal air filtration system. Fresh air anywhere. More info at easyflowusa.com, code Tom. Masterclass with world-class instructors. More info at masterclass.com/Hartman. And Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until, at last, we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits, in that secret, a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different, inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest healthcare program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. I have a treat for you here over the next 10 minutes. On the line with us is activist, Academy Award-winning actor, currently starring in Grace and Frankie over on Netflix with Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, Sam Waterston, and the presenter of the new documentary film, The World Is My Country, the Gary Davis story, Martin Sheen, and Arthur Kanigis, who is the producer and director of The World Is My Country and the president of Future Wave, Inc., a nonprofit organization dedicated to shifting our culture of violence to a culture of peace. And guys, thanks so much for joining the program here. If I could start with you, Martin, tell us about Gary Davis and, well, what brought you into this project?
Well, Arthur Kanigis came to me with this documentary and asked me to narrate it about this guy, a fellow actor back in the 40s named Gary Davis. He was on Broadway understudying Kay, what's his name? The actor Danny Kaye. Yeah, and he was drafted. He ended up in, well, I shouldn't say ended up, but he served in the Army Air Corps as a bombardier pilot in Europe, and he had a significant number of missions, bombing missions, that he began to wonder about the people on the ground that were subject of his bombs. His last bombing raid was at Pandamunum, which was the Nazi base for developing the V-2 rocket, and they were hopefully developing an A-bomb before the war ended. So he came home, and in 1948, he started thinking about ways that he could prevent what was the world's leaders were leading to a third world war. With the arming of the Soviet Union and the United States, and not much communication between them about peace. So he decided to do it on his own. The UN was meeting in Paris in 1948, in that spring, and he went there and he managed to address them in a very dramatic way, which is caught on film, and that's in Arthur's documentary. So I'm going to leave it to him to take the story from there.
So, Arthur Kanigis, tell us about Gary Davis. Or the rest of the story?
Well,
Gary Davis, of course, was so upset. He was proud to bomb Peenemünde and the war plant, but he was horrified that he also had to bomb cities full of civilians, and his own brother was killed. Why am I killing these people? Just because they're on the wrong side of an invisible line? And then he saw the Hiroshima footage. He said, what if I'm recalled to bomb Moscow in a war that would end humanity, end life on Earth? So what he did is that he startled post-war Europe using his skills as an actor to pull off this dramatic act of political theater right in the United Nations General Assembly. And this riveted war-weary Europe. 20,000 people rallied with him. Einstein joined him, Albert Camus, Jean-Paul Sartre, all the top famous intellectuals, Simone de Beauvoir, and they ended up sparking a mighty movement and a huge 20,000 people at their velodrome, the Madison Square Garden of Paris, on December 9th, 1948. The next day, the Soviets, who had been adamantly blocking the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as an intolerable intrusion on their internal affairs, they stepped aside, obtained, and let that incredible document get passed unanimously, saying that every single person on Earth has rights and freedoms. And then Gary devoted his life to actually finding a way to create enforceable world law so that we could all appreciate and live by those freedoms, which, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, if we could all honor and appreciate those freedoms, we could eliminate the wars that are plaguing our planet and the climate change that is threatening to destroy us.
Yeah, I thought one of the most remarkable pieces of his story was, he started creating these citizens of the world passports, and there's all these undocumented people around the world, refugees mostly, who literally can't get into or out of countries because they don't have documentation, and people have been using these for decades. It's been working very, very well. Martin Sheen, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the United Nations passed in the way that Arthur just told us about, so dramatically with help from Gary Davis, we don't quite match the rhetoric of that here in the United States right now. I mean, it calls, for example, health care as a human right. What are your thoughts on that and what we can do in that direction, or what did Gary Davis think about that?
Well, he spent 10 years from 1948 to 1958-59 traveling around the world. That's what his book covers in every episode, in every country that he crossed into. Most of the time he was arrested, and he spent time in jails, and some of the most infamous jails on the planet. The one country that stamped his world passport and allowed him to come in was India. And he got a meeting with Prime Minister Nehru, who gave him his blessing. That is an extraordinary episode in his book, where he covers all of his adventures going from one country to another, all the jails that he had to suffer through, and all the indignities. A man without a country who claimed the world as his country. And Arthur and I are very much involved with trying now to present his story as a limited series for television, and that's why Arthur's holding the book, My Country is the World, because he would have a confrontation with a border guard or a security officer or an immigration official, and he would stun them with the reality of his situation. They would throw him in jail, and while he's there, he would type up exactly what the scene was that he had just played through. So we're getting like almost as if he had a cell phone in those days. All he had was a typewriter, but he pretty much word for word remembers all of these incidents over almost a 10-year period of his confrontation about immigration. So here we are in 2021, a new century, and the same problem, that our borders are closed. But more importantly, it's our hearts that we have to open up. We have to pray that we are relieved from our hearts of stone and given hearts of flesh, because that's what he started with. He never lost his sense of humor. And the book is filled with, so many wonderful sometimes very difficult situations, but he never lost his sense of humor, and people adored him.
Yeah. Martin Sheen, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to jump in to say he was never jailed for all the people that he murdered with his bombs. He was always jailed for not having papers, not having documentation, because he was a citizen of the world. That's why most of the time he was jailed before he created the world passport. Once he created it, he actually traveled frequently with it, and through history, almost every nation on Earth, the 193 nations in the UN, over 185 of them have at one time or another stamped these world passports. So it's not an easy travel document, but it's a tool for claiming your human rights under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it is it's at least also a wonderful way to identify yourself with the world. And you can get it and the book and so on and our movie at theworldismycountry.com.
Which was the next thing I was going to say, that I kind of buried the lead. I should have mentioned that in the introduction to Martin Sheen and Arthur Kanigis. Theworldismycountry.com is the website. And Arthur, if you could just quickly summarize what this project is, about this documentary, this movie that's coming.
Okay. Well, this movie, which has been already playing on public television stations across the country, it tells this startling story, and it's a story really about discovering who we are as human beings. I mean, we think we're, Americans or Russians or this and that, and we think we're on all these different sides, red states, green states, blue states, purple states. But, what happens is that if we really get down to it, we are all human beings sharing one planet. And Gary really uplifts us with an incredible vision of the power that we the people have. He actually makes kind of a startling revelation, and that is, here we are begging and pleading our government leaders to please save us from climate change. He said, wait a minute. It says right there, yesterday was the official holiday for the Declaration of Independence. It says it is the right of the people to institute new government. And Gary says, well, hey, we're the people. Why don't we go ahead and institute government at the global level? A mind-boggling idea. But now with the Internet, he says, he was so excited about the Internet when it came along. He passed away in 2013. But he had this whole synergistic system of how we could, get together and invent something new. Back in 1776, they invented something new, and Jefferson said there to be a revolution every 20 years. Well, we have a chance, the young people today, to invent a whole new way to create law at the global level that can help protect and defend us all, our rights, and the ability to keep our planet going.
There you go. Arthur Kanigis and Martin Sheen. The project is theworldismycountry.com. You can check it out. Guys, thanks so much for being with us today. Great talking to both of you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you.
Oh, we loved it. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you both. It's a great project and good stuff. Theworldismycountry.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we will be right back in just a moment with more of the Thom Hartmann Program in just a second. And welcome back. Ruth in West Los Angeles. Hey, Ruth, what's up?
Hi. First of all, can you hear me?
I can, yes, just fine.
Okay, perfect. So the first thing I wanted to say quickly is for the person who was interested in Carol Anderson, KPFA had a wonderful interview between her and Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, the author of Indigenous History of the United States. And it is actually posted now on City Lights Bookstore website. So if people want to learn more about the book, it is a great interview. Second of all, I want to thank you so much for your rants. The only trouble is that, like, the one that I really like is the one on Reagan and all the bad things he did, but it goes so fast I can't write them all down. But anyway, the reason I called was that given the recent Supreme Court, decisions on voting, I remember listening to you before, and you had a novel and ingenious way of getting around the filibuster, 60 votes needed, to change to majority, where only 51 votes would be needed in terms of, eliminating voting restrictions. So could you repeat that? I remember it was brilliant at the time, but I've forgotten exactly what your method was, but it was ingenious.
Don't recall, Ruth, any specific gimmicks. I mean, the filibuster is not a law. It is part of the rules of the Senate. And the rules of the Senate can be changed with a one-vote majority. So you've got 50 Democrats in the Senate, plus you've got Kamala Harris. That's 51 votes. So if all 51 of them vote to change the rules, they can simply strip the filibuster out of the rules, or the variation that I had suggested, because it seems like there's some affection for the Senate pretending that it's like this great deliberative body, and so we should still have the filibuster, is that, if so many Americans saw Jimmy Stewart's, movie back in the day, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and they think of the filibuster as Jimmy Stewart standing there saying, "I'm not going to stop talking," and like this. And so let's just change the rules so that the filibuster's actually like that. I mean, right now, when Rand Paul decides that he doesn't like the voting rights bill, he simply sends an email, or has his staff person send an email to Chuck Schumer's staff person and say, "I object," and suddenly it's stopped until Schumer can gather 60 votes to overcome it. We should flip that around and say, okay, fine, if you object to it, you and 40 of your friends have to sit, or 39 of your friends have to sit on the floor of the United States Senate continuously, and you have to talk. And the minute you stop talking and the minute your friends leave, then we're going to hold a vote. That's the end of the filibuster. And do it the way that Jimmy Stewart did in the movie. And because that's what most Americans think a filibuster is. Was that what you were thinking of, Ruth?
I guess that is it. So you arrive at it because if one person out of that 39 or 40 doesn't do the filibuster, then at that point
it breaks
there's
down.
A vote. But the outcome of that vote could still be the same. Is that correct? Or
it could be. I mean,
really?
we've got, for example, there's 50 Democrats. If one of them decides that he or she does not like that particular piece of legislation, then the legislation fails. I mean, that's how narrow our margins are right now, which is why we have to work as hard as we can to get more Democrats elected to the Senate next year. Ruth, thank you for the call. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box. Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that, does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program, of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. 23 minutes past the hour. Something I wanted to bring up. We've covered a lot of territory today. And this whole issue of citizen of the world is a fascinating one. The United Nations and what's being done and whatnot. But several people have called today about the filibuster and what can we do about it. And of course, the two high-profile people, the two people who have actually published pieces in the Washington Post and the New York Times arguing that we shouldn't end the filibuster are, of course, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. And Joe Manchin has tried heroically, I would say, to get Republicans to prove that he can get 10 Republicans to go along with him on anything. And what has happened over and over and over again is the old Lucy with the football scenario, where he's got nothing. You know, the Republicans say, oh, yeah, fix this and tweak that and do this and get rid of that. And so you make the legislation Republican acceptable, and then when you present it for the vote, the Republicans say, no, we're not going to vote for it anyway. And I think it's just time to walk away from that. But what's happened with Kyrsten Sinema is absolutely fascinating. There's a new poll that came out. This was just last week. I found this posted over at dailycoast.com by Blue Tuesday. The title is Kyrsten Sinema is in real trouble after all awful poll numbers and big new revelations. And first of all, to put this in context, in Arizona right now, among Democrats, Senator Mark Kelly, Gabby Gifford's husband, the guy who was elected in the 2020 election to represent, to be the junior senator from Arizona, he has an 87% approval rating. 87%. And the percentage of voters who are Democrats who disapprove of Mark Kelly, and by the way, incidentally, his main issue is gun control, the percentage of Democrats who disapprove of him is 6%. So he's got 87% approval rating. Kyrsten Sinema, 47% with Democrats. I pointed out last week, you know, that Claire McCaskill had said on MSNBC that, you know, Kyrsten Sinema is more popular than Joe Biden in Arizona. Well, yeah, there's a lot of Republicans who are very happy that she is screwing with Democrats, but they're never going to vote for her. There's no way. Not even a possibility, not even a remote possibility. So this is a really tough one. I mean, you know, the Sinema's approval rating with Republicans right now stands at 54 to 32%. 54% of Republicans approve of her. But, you know, like I said, it does not mean that they will vote for her. And so Kyrsten Sinema has, it appears to me, and again, I'm an observer on the outside. She's welcome to come on this program and tell us what is actually going on. I believe Sean has reached out to her staff and said, would you like to come on the program and talk to us? We routinely do that. But she's going to have to decide, does she want to be the quirky Democratic version of John McCain Maverick, regardless of topic, and just kind of ride that Maverick bus, probably to losing her reelection bid in 3 years? Or does she want to get on board with the Democrats and get her approval rating, you know, up there? I mean, she's not even at 50%. She's underwater. Her approval rating with Democrats is where Donald Trump's approval rating was with the American people, under 50%. You cannot survive as a politician with those kind of numbers in your own party. So she's going to have to make some serious decisions here. Hopefully she'll make the decision to end the filibuster and get with the program and help rescue America from this right-wing takeover that is in progress. I'll pick up your phone calls after the break. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here, Thom Hartmann.
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. all labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amax, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. So just to clean up an error here, a little earlier in the program, I had said that the last time a Republican took control of the White House, now the re-election of George W. Bush is the exception to this, but that was a re-election. But the last time that a president actually won the White House for the first time, the last time that a Republican took control of the White House with a majority vote in the United States, I said it was 1992 and it was George H.W. Bush. It was 1988. And it was George H.W. Bush. Tip of the hat to Tiberius Gracchus, who corrected me on Twitter. Thank you, Tiberius. I plead brain fart. 92 was the year that Bill Clinton beat George Herbert Walker Bush. So definitely George Herbert Walker Bush didn't win a majority of American voters in that election. No, it was the Willie Horton ad in 1988 that, against Michael Dukakis that just wiped out Dukakis. The fear of a black man was what George Herbert Walker Bush successfully rode to the legislature. So anyway, let's pick up your phone calls here. James in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, James, what's on your mind today? Oh, James just dropped his phone. Sometimes people try to push the button to take a call and it doesn't quite work. Karen in Tucson, Arizona. Let's try this. Karen, what's up?
Hi. I live in Tucson in Pima County, and Kirsten Sinema is my senator. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people here who are not willing to vote for her again, and they want her primaried. Of course, Pima County is the more liberal area of Arizona, Mm-hmm.
Along with Maricopa, yeah.
Well, Maricopa is very conservative.
Oh, really?
The East Valley there is very conservative. That's why a lot of things get passed is because of the voting up there.
Oh, interesting.
But she voted with Trump 57% of the time.
Whoa, that's not good. Yeah. So is she up for re-election in 2024? 2022.
I think it's 22, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. I'd have to look it up. But has a potential primary contender emerged that has a broad consensus and support across the party in Arizona?
Well, I would vote for Ruben Gallegos out of he's up in Phoenix.
Right, who represents in the House.
Yeah. Yes, right. But there are a couple other people who are kind of starting to emerge. They haven't really said much, but people are starting to take notice. And if you read the Arizona Daily Star, there are letters in there every single day about how disappointed they are in Kirsten Sinema and how they're not going to vote for her again.
Do you think if she were to be the person whose vote undid the filibuster and passed the For the People Act, for example, that she could redeem herself, or has the damage been done so badly that that's not going to happen?
I think the damage has been done.
Yeah.
She was down here on the border with, I think it was John Cornyn, and people were not happy about that. I think the damage is done. I think she's done, actually.
Interesting. Karen, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the information from Tucson. Lynn in El Segundo, California. Hey, Lynn, what's on your mind today?
Well, it's interesting you're talking about cinema because she's been on my mind, and I think that she doesn't care at all if she's reelected or not. She doesn't strive to continue as a senator. She wants to be a lobbyist. They get a lot more money. She wants to be a corporate lobbyist, and she's trying to get attention of the, big corporations. That's what I believe. And by the way, this morning on Democracy Now!, there was a major, impactful a story about Greenpeace in the UK. They released a video that has Keith McCoy and another lobbyist for Exxon talking about their strategy. And they say Senator Capito, the ranking member on the Environment and Public Works.
Capito in West Virginia.
Yeah.
And Joe Manchin.
She's one of our... They said, the reporter asked them, are the crucial guys for you? And they said, Senator Capito, Joe Manchin. I talk to his office every week. He's the kingmaker on this because he's the Democrat from West Virginia. So it's the Manchins, the Cinemas, the Testers, and they said we're trying to get to Biden through his friend, Senator Chris Coons.
Right.
They actually said this in a video, secretive video they didn't know was recording. You should see this video.
I have.
It's amazing.
It came out last week, and I actually read parts of that on the air on Thursday. That's quite all right. It absolutely is amazing, Lynn, and just coming out and saying it, and I'm going to be talking about that more tomorrow. So, but thanks for the call. I am completely with you. Thank you, Lewis in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. My question is do people like Donald Trump, Matt Gaetz, Rudy Giuliani, Mike Lindell, do they think like the more they get out there and demonize prosecutors and just plead their case in the court of public opinion, that prosecutors are going to get scared and not pursue them? Like,
no, I don't think that they think that they're going to win that way, but I do think that to the extent that there may be a jury trial, they're trying to work the referees right now, the potential jurors, to the extent that, and for Donald Trump, this is a huge fundraiser. I mean, I'm getting fundraising emails. I tweeted one out on, might have been Saturday, I think. I got one from Don Jr. that said, my father has authorized a special blah-de-blah, and I tweeted that out along with the link. I haven't gotten a fundraising appeal from them since, which tells me not that they're not still fundraising, but that they probably took me off their list after I retweeted their email. But this is what grifters do. They are trying to extract more cash from the MAGA followers, and Donald Trump is right now. In fact, I got an email on Thursday or Friday of last week saying it was just before the 1st of July. It might have been Tuesday or Wednesday actually. Saying this is the end of the quarter, it's our end of quarter final, which they would always do when they were running a campaign, but there's no campaign, there's no candidate.
Yeah.
So why end of quarter? Well, because and then you go to the page, you click the link and you go to the page, the Win Red page, and there's those little pre-checked boxes that say yes, make this a monthly donation, and yes, in 2 weeks make an additional $50 and do that weekly too, and it's basically designed to drain the checking accounts of people who, mostly boomers, who are old enough and have kind of lost it enough that they're not really reading the fine print and paying attention, or who have just been so enamored of all this that's where it's gone. But anyhow, that's what I'm seeing. Lewis, thanks for the call. Israel in Chandler, Arizona. Hey, Israel, you have some thoughts here on cinema?
I absolutely do. First, I wanted to correct your earlier caller on the elections. Mark Kelly is up in 22 because he was elected to complete McCain's term when he died. And then Sinema is up in 24. And
That's
absolutely, we're most of us and most that I talk to are just disgusted with the positions that she's taken. And the other thing I wanted to say, up here in the Valley, or Maricopa County to be more precise, there are huge sections that are extremely right-wing conservative. This is where Paul Gosar comes from. I'm sure that name rings a bell. Andy Biggs also is representative of a district here in the Valley. I'm sure that name rings a bell as well. But we do have pockets of liberal, progressive populations. As a matter of fact, here in Chandler, one of our representatives at the state level is a Democratic representative. And, of course, the majority of Phoenix itself is a bit more progressive. Sinema came out of there as well. She was a representative of Tempe, Phoenix area. So we do have pockets in the Valley up here where there are progressive candidates. And we've also had state-level positions like not the governor, but Secretary of State, Attorney General, where we've had Democrats elected, which means they've been able to garner the majority of the vote statewide.
Right. Which means that Arizona is, if not a purple state, inching in that direction.
Absolutely inching. I'd say a little bit more than inching, if not completely purple.
Yeah,
but I've been here for 20 years this summer, as a matter of fact, and I've seen it going that way. We elected a Democratic governor in 2002 who unfortunately left us to serve in the Obama administration. Wish he had stayed here to continue building the Democratic Party, but it didn't happen. So that's where we're at.
Okay, Israel, thank you. Thanks for the information and the voice, you know, the inside scoop from Arizona. We'll be right back, 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the place where smart people get their news. We'll be back right after this. And welcome back. James, watching us on Free Speech TV in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, James, what's on your mind today?
How's it going, Tom?
Good.
I think I got disconnected the other time. I apologize for that.
No, it's all good.
But I don't have a great deal to say, but I just wanted to reach out to you and let you know that, you know, when they tried to pass that bill recently and the Republicans blocked it and what have you, we were very disappointed here in my household. And myself and my two professional daughters, we got together, and I actually believe that we've come up with a mechanism or proposal to where the Senate can actually pass H.R. 1 and 4 without doing away with the filibuster.
How do you do that?
And I was telling the people that I was speaking with in your office, that is, we kind of have it documented, and it's kind of lengthy a little bit to kind of go in detail, but it's a very ingenious way that they can pass those bills without the filibuster. And I was trying to reach out to share it with someone, and I sent a couple of emails to some of the senators, but I guess they get so many emails that mine just get lost. And then I thought about, I watch you every day, and so I said, well, maybe if I can touch base with you guys. I know sometimes you have a congressperson on sometimes.
Yeah.
And I've seen him on there. But
so the two ways that I can see, or three ways, you know, one of them, I've mentioned just changing the Senate rules to end the filibuster. You could also change the Senate rules to modify the filibuster. I proposed the Jimmy Stewart filibuster. There's a third way to modify the Senate rules. Back in the day, Robert Byrd and company paved the way. I believe that Robert Byrd was part of this. Paved the way for the Senate to have an exception to the filibuster for anything that had to do with budget issues. And this is called budget reconciliation. If it has to do with raising money through taxes or spending money, then you can ignore the filibuster. And the rationale that they used for this was that the power of Congress to raise taxes and spend money is established in the Constitution. So you don't want to limit that power with a filibuster. Then the power to appoint federal judges. Harry Reid blew up the filibuster in regard to that, and his rationale again was in the Constitution, in Article 3 of the Constitution, or in Article 1 of the Constitution, it gives Congress the power to advise and consent the president in the appointment of federal judges. And because this is a congressional power, it shouldn't be limited by a minority. It shouldn't, it should be subject to democracy, basically. And then Mitch McConnell came along and said, we're going to apply that same logic to the Supreme Court. So what I would say is, okay, it also in the Constitution on multiple occasions talks about the right of people to vote. And so that's in the Constitution too. So let's change the Senate rules to add a third exception to the filibuster, the first being for budget, the second being for judges, the third being for things that have to do with the rights of voters. And then you can pass the For the People Act. Is that what you're suggesting, James, or is it something else?
You were very warm on the last time, but what I was referring to, the filibuster can stay in place. It can be the 60-vote threshold, and they still will be able to pass bills. I mean, they wouldn't have to touch the filibuster.
How?
I know right now all the argument is about the filibuster.
How do you do that?
And that's the thing, dear, and that I didn't want to discuss it on air, I mean.
Oh, okay. James, if you can't discuss it on air, then we can't talk. We'll be back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election, to the Trump family's collusion with Russia, to Ivanka Trump's trademarks, to federal spending at Trump properties, to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes, to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. I see how you're trying to plug holes in the filibuster. Fourth category would be security issues, where things have to be voted on because of security of the nation. That can't be filibustered, right?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just to recap for people who might have just tuned in, Bill, the point that I was making a little earlier to an earlier caller was that, the filibuster requires 60 votes out of 100 people in the Senate. There's only 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. So first, back in the day, and I'm pretty sure Robert Byrd played a big role in this, they carved a hole in the filibuster for budget issues, raising taxes and spending money. And the rationale was that because budget issues, the power of Congress to raise and spend money, is basically the essence of Article 1, Section 8. Because it's in the Constitution, therefore, it shouldn't be limited by a minority in the Senate. So then Harry Reid said, similarly, with regard to the appointment of federal judges, this was when Mitch McConnell was blocking federal judges for Barack Obama. Harry Reid said, no, we should allow federal judges to go through because that's in the Constitution, the advice and consent of the Senate. That's in the Constitution, too. And then Mitch McConnell took that logic the next step and said, and we're going to apply that to Supreme Court justices as well. So what I was saying was, okay, there's a third area that is also in the Constitution, and that is the right of people to vote. And so we should again change the filibuster to say that you can't filibuster legislation that has to do with the right of people to vote, whether that's a new Voting Rights Act, whether that's the For the People Act, whether that's the John Lewis Act, whatever it may be. So, Bill, what goes beyond that?
Tom?
Yeah.
That the Senate should pass a rule that all laws, just like the president has 10 days to sign a law, otherwise it goes into effect. The Senate should be given 30 days to pass a law. It supersedes the filibuster or anything. The law must be voted on within 30 days, otherwise it's passed.
I think the president's power to filibuster is pretty solid. I mean, it's
filibuster, his 10-day rule.
I mean, not filibuster. Excuse me, veto to veto legislation is. I believe that's in the Constitution.
Well,
yeah, it requires the signature. It is in the Constitution.
Right. But if we have a friendly president that we don't mind if he signs it, that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, but you have to plan for unfriendly presidents. I mean, you hope for the best and plan for the worst. You know.
I think out of conservation of money, which is a big deal, they should limit when they have to vote to 30 days, no matter what. It's over.
Yeah, time limiting debate, time limiting discussion, saying bills have to come up, things like that. Those are all things that I could get behind. Well, Bill, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Ann in Aroma Park, Illinois. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I'm going to make it real brief and go right back to the beginning of the show where you talked about why we can't have nice things. Campaign financing. And I guess what bothers me is that the one provision, or one of the provisions Joe Manchin is very opposed to in the Help America Vote Act, is public financing of campaigns. He does not want that in there. And I'm thinking if we don't get public financing of campaigns, I don't think we'll ever be able to get even a half a mile closer to what our peers have in other true first world nations, because I don't think we're a first world nation anymore. And that's my point.
Yeah, I would take it even beyond public financing of campaigns and point out that in most of the other developed countries in the world, you don't have to register to vote. When you turn 18, or whatever the voting age is in that country, I think it's pretty universally 18 now. When you turn 18, the government sends you your voter registration card and says, okay, you're all signed up, because they've had you on their rolls ever since you were born. Your birth certificate basically enrolls you to vote. And we should be doing the same thing here in the United States. Instead, we've got this whole vestige of Jim Crow, where local officials get to decide whether you are eligible to vote and make you jump through all kinds of hoops to register, and then have the power to remove you from the voter registration rolls based on some vague suspicion that you've moved, or just the fact that you live in a largely black neighborhood or Hispanic neighborhood. It's just wrong. I think that we should just clean up our act with regard to voting and try to get, voting participation back. It's over 80% in Sweden, because they just,
wow.
They mail, it's election time. Here's your ballot. It comes in the mail.
Yep, that's what we need. That's really what we need.
Yeah, and I don't think this is rocket science. And then to your point, Ann, talking about public financing of campaigns. If we can't get something like that together, then we have just surrendered our entire political process to a couple of hundred billionaires. And, that's no way to run a democracy. And thanks for the call. Thanks for listening to WCPT. What a day, huh? We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. If we're going to preserve our republic, we have to participate in it. And that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. We'll continue our conversation tomorrow. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.